Hello and welcome. I'm Traci Harding, and today I'm here to talk to you about my second book, which was An Echo in Time. And this book followed on from The Ancient Future. We jump into the story 20 years down the track when all the children of the Dragon Circle have grown up and are fighting for their own place in the Dragon Circle. They were an elite group of trainers and masters of the armies of the alliance that was taking place in Britain at that time. And so you get a lot of fun with the kids coming up and trying to compete with their famous parents, who have been set apart by the goddess to lead her country out of turmoil and fight the Saxons. But the Saxons are having their own problems because one half of the country has been plunged into a deluge, and one half of the country is prospering. And of course, the Saxons think they've been cursed by the goddess. Um, and so setting out to kind of make war on the Britons, even though they promised 20 years before, they promised the goddess that they wouldn't do it. This book, where the first book takes place in ancient Gwynedd, and then we jump forward in time to modern Wales, and then back in time again. This one is taking us from ancient Gwynedd to Atlantis, and then back again, and into the future. To a project that's taking place over in the Azores, an archaeological project, because our heroine knows that that is where the sunken city of Atlantis is to be found, and she needs to retrieve something from there. So, no spoilers, I'm not telling you any more than that. But this book was also reincarnated a few times. This is the original from 1996. And the artwork was actually done by my husband and partner at the time, and the same with the first book and the one that followed, actually quite a few that followed. And then it was rejacketed again in, I think, 2006. Um, as I said last time, the rejacketing wasn't that popular. I think the fans actually liked the original book, and it's quite coveted these days if you can find one with the original cover on it. And then it was the middle book that was featured in the huge anthology as well. So it's had quite a few incarnations. So the concept for this one, well, actually, when I finished writing The Ancient Future, I was fairly determined that I was never going to write a sequel. I thought, right, that's it, moving on. And so I started researching for what would become the Alchemist Key, which at that time was called the Hellfire Club, because I was researching Dashwood and his Hellfire Club. And it was going to be a very different book. But while I was doing that, I had a psychic friend of mine call me and say that HarperCollins were going to be asking me to do a trilogy and I should start writing the synopsises. And um, I had this kind of thought in the back of my mind, wow, this character, Tori Alexander, could really go a lot of places. She's time traveling. She's kind of got the keys to the timelines now. There's a lot of places that we could go, and there's a lot of history we haven't covered that I'd really like to look at, and she would be the perfect person. And one of the places I really wanted to go was Atlantis, because it was just not written about very much as a place, as a location for stories. And I really wanted to go there personally, so off I went, um, and wrote a synopsis for a third book as well, where we're going into the future to the gathering of kings that was kind of a prophesied event. I can't remember if it was in the first book or it sort of came up later. But anyway, so I wrote the two synopsises, and I was literally printing them out on the printer back in the days when we used to print out things. When I got a call from HarperCollins saying, "Oh, we'd really love you to come in and we'd like to talk to you about doing a trilogy." So there you go. Echo in Time was born. So the research on this one was quite extensive. I actually had a reader question from Gavin, and I'll answer it here because I didn't get a lot of reader questions for this book, so I'm going to do a video on writing questions later on in the month rather than a Q&A on this. But I did get one question, and it was about Gavin wanted to know how I constructed my vision for Atlantis. Um, where I got all my information from. And so that kind of falls under research. So I'll answer that question here. Now, to start with, um, I want to mention, I didn't mention this one last week. Now, this book, I have used this book for absolutely just about every book I've written. If you don't have any ideas for stories, grab this book. It's absolutely filled with them. Okay? Every weird and wonderful and fantastic thing from every culture that you would ever want to know about or read about. Okay? It's absolutely fantastic, and I have used it a whole lot. So I thought I'd mention that one before I get into the stuff that was specifically Atlantis. Now, a lot of the books that I talked about last week, I also used um, the ones on Britain, especially. But I found this little gem. I can't even remember where I found it now. Probably the ADR bookshop, and it's called Atlantean Traditions in Celtic Ancient Britain. And it's by Anthony Roberts. Now, this book has some of the most amazing tidbits in it, including this. Now, this is really interesting. Take a look at this. Now, do you know what that is? That's every star sign laid out around the Glastonbury tour. These trackways have been there since before the Romans landed. I thought that was fairly interesting, and there was actually 13 uh, so, signs actually plotted out around, and he goes into the whole detail about it. Like you can see the bull, and you can see the like Virgo here, and yeah, like he's got them all written down. But yeah, you can see them. Um, but he was actually talking about how the trackways in ancient Britain go all the way back to Atlantean times and probably earlier. And that's really the same with the whole planet. I mean, I've been looking recently for something I've researched. I was looking at the site at Angkor Wat in Cambodia. And now the huge big temple that's built there was built in, like, I don't know, the 9th century or something like that. There was a huge ancient city there called Funan that was 3rd century, because Chinese records go back that far, and they actually wrote about like going down and visiting Funan. But then Graham Hancock did some research into how all the temples, and there's a lot of temples there, are all astrologically aligned to, I think it was Draconius, the star constellation, but they're not aligned to it right now. It aligns to it like 10,500 years ago. Or 10,500 BC. I think that was the date. So it's about 13,000 years ago, which is about when I kind of picked the deluge of Atlantis to be taking place. And there's a lot of monuments on the planet that all line up at that particular time. And there was trade going on. I mean, like, we didn't discover the whole trade route. The Silk Road was happening long before, Genghis Khan got in there and actually forged a path all the way through to Europe back then. So yeah, I found that book was incredibly interesting, and just the parallel between Atlantean traditions and like the Celts. Even though they weren't really called the Celts, they didn't call themselves the Celts. But another book that I found really interesting, like when it came to all the priesthoods in Atlantis and the gods and etc., this book was very, very handy. And there was a lot of channeled information from Murray Hope, and it was just brilliant. As a writer of fiction, as I always say, it doesn't have to be true, it just has to be feasible. But it really did ring true with a lot of my readers. But on a more practical level, she also wrote this one. This is also by Murray Hope. It's called Atlantis, Myth or Reality. And there's lots of quotes. There's channeled information in here. There's also Timaeus and Critias by Plato. I actually have a copy of that somewhere, but it's a tiny little slither of a book and I can't find it. But as far as the layout and everything of Atlantis, Plato was the first one to put it all down in a story, Timaeus and Critias, and it's a conversation that goes on between them. And I mean, people say, or scholars say, that it was Plato's only work of fiction. Plato wasn't really a fiction writer, as far as I can tell. And so, I don't know why they would think that that was his only work of fiction. He absolutely believed that Atlantis existed, and I think there's mounting evidence that Atlantis existed, that continents move, that, Earth masses, you have some rising and some falling. There was a lovely piece in this called Atlantis Rising, which was really, really interesting. So yeah, that's where all the information came from. There was loads more. You'll find in the back of every single one of my books, I put a bibliography of all the books I referenced. Dragon's Triangle was another one I used. That was Charles Berlitz, which was really all about. It's the same as the Devil's Triangle. What with the Bermuda Triangle? That's right. There's more. There's another one. There's one on the other side of the planet as well. So yeah, that's all the stuff that I use for research. If you're interested in following up on any of the other themes. There was a lot of themes in this one that really interested me. There was a lot of healing going on in Atlantis, so dealing with the chakra system and chi energy before it was called chi energy, um, all that sort of thing. Time travel, obviously, was another heavily leaned on theme in this book, and being able to, like, the frequency of the human body and 12-strand DNA, that all started to come out in the book about Atlantis. We also tackled the subject of curses in this book, those that were imposed by others and those that were self-imposed. Also, karma played a huge role in these books, along with reincarnation and our past lives, and lots of other interesting esoteric information too. So if you haven't read it, and most of you probably have, but if you haven't, there you go. There's lots of interesting information. Some of it's quite spiritual, but it's not as spiritual as some of the stuff that comes up later. And that's the thing about my books. I mean, I never wanted to write a sequel just for the hell of writing a sequel. I only ever wrote a sequel because there was more information that went a layer deeper or went somewhere else. And that's why this ended up as a 13-book series, because just kept discovering more and more. So, as with the last book video that I did, Bolinda Audio has given me permission to put an excerpt from the audio book for Echo in Time at the end of this video. And so here it is. It's narrated by Edwina Wren, written by me, and published by Bolinda Audio.
The month-long festival of Lunasa had always been celebrated by the native Britons to honour the harvesting of their yearly crop. But for the past 20 years, the feast of the god of the sun also commemorated the signing of the pact that now bonded each British kingdom to the other. Every year, these great kings and leaders met to discuss their progress and the problems facing their alliance. This gathering was held at Arwestley in Powys, for it was the most central point of Allied Britain. In addition to the normal festivities that such an occasion would suggest, Arwestley was also celebrating the 20 years of prosperity it had seen since Powys had been freed from the tyrannous reign of King Ciglas. Powys had then entered into an alliance with neighbouring kingdoms under the guidance of Ciglas's successor and its current ruler, King Brockwell. Brockwell was the great-grandson of the famous warrior, Canetha, as his predecessor Ciglas had been, and although Brockwell was originally a son of Gwynedd, the people of Powys adored him. For this king was of good heart and possessed a fearless disposition. Nominated by the goddess to lead Powys out of darkness, lead them out of darkness he did. The kingdom's fields overflowed with the bounty of the goddess, and peace had prevailed in the wake of the eons of turmoil their forefathers had known. Brockwell's queen, Katrin, was the epitome of a rags-to-riches story. Born the daughter of a simple farmer, she had elevated herself in society through her acts of bravery for king and country. The first female warrior to be initiated into the Circle of 12, known as the Warriors of the Goddess, she had won her social standing and the heart of Brockwell during the debacle of Ciglas. As tiny and petite as she was beautiful and chaste, Katrin had blessed the kingdom with 3 fine, strapping sons to succeed the king. Her eldest son, Blaine, aged 8 years and 10, was heir to the throne of Powys. Owen, her second-born, was 5 years and 10, and Kai, her youngest, was 2 years and 10. The eldest son of King Brockwell was Bryce, aged 5 years and 20. Bryce was the adopted half-brother of the other 3, who, due to a confusing set of circumstances early in life, also carried the title Earl of Penman, his father's estate in Gwynedd. Bryce would have been the heir to Brockwell's throne in Powys, had he not been illegitimate. But as it was, his 3 younger legitimate brothers all had the right to claim the crown before him. Though the Queen had not borne Bryce of her own loins, she loved him dearly, so much so that she found herself favouring him over the others at times. For how could she help but feel responsible for doing him out of his inheritance?
So, there you go. I hope you enjoyed that. I really enjoyed putting it together for you. So yeah, that was a little sneak peek from Echo in Time on Bolinda Audio. So if you haven't got it and you like being able to listen while you do other things, there you go. Thank you so much for being with me. I hope you've enjoyed this little insight into an echo in time. If you've got any questions or anything you'd like me to do a video on, just leave comments below. Or if you've got any feedback for me at all, do that. All the links to, where you can get my books, or if you want a personal mentoring session with me, they're all below also. I have links to Fish Pond if you'd like to purchase any of the books I mentioned, and a link to iTunes if you'd like any of the audio. So that's it really. Thank you so much, and I'll see you again next week. Like, share, and subscribe.